We are live. Today's daf, what's today's daf? Mem Aleph. Today's daf is extremely yesodistic as far as, in other words, it's a very important daf as far as conveying halachic practice in the course of a meal. When we make hamotzi, what additional brachas do we have to make, and what brachas are we exempt from? All of this is going to be covered in our daf today. And of course we're going to simplify it because of Daf Yomi, but of course we understand that there's a tremendous amount of complexity here. Hayu lefan of min and harbe. The Mishnah had said simply as follows, that if a person has multiple different kinds of foods in front of him, and and one of those foods is one of the 7 species of Eretz Yisrael: wheat, barley, olives, grapes, pomegranates, dates, figs, right? So we understand it's one of those 7, and plus you've got other food in front of him. So you've got, for example, you've got an olive and you've got a piece of celery in front of you. And Rabbi Yehuda says that if one of those is from the Min Shiva, the 7 of Eretz Yisrael, so you have to make a bracha on that. And the Chachamim say, no, make on whichever one you want. Whichever one you want. If you want to make a bracha on the celery, go ahead. So we need some clarification here. So Amar Ula Machlokas B'Shabir Chosein Shabbos. The Machlokas is only when the brachas are equivalent. So either both of them are Bori Pri Ha'etz, or both of them are Bori Pri Ha'adama, in which case you're only going to be making one bracha. So the example that I gave you is actually not apt. It's not an olive and celery, it's an olive and an apple. Okay? So both of them are Bori Pri Ha'etz, in which case you're only going to be making one Bori Pri Ha'etz, and that'll cover both food items. So there, the Rabbi Yehuda Savra min Shiva Adif, V'Rabbanan Savri min Chaviv Adif. So Rabbi Yehuda says it's better for you to attach your bracha to the more important food item, which is one of the produce items that Eretz Yisrael is known by, instead of making your bracha on the apple, which is just an apple. Okay? However, aval b'she'ein berachos and Shabbos, divrei hakol mevarech al zeh v'chozer mevarech al zeh. So the Rabbanan say that in that situation, that what's better? Chaviv is better. That if you happen to like apples more than you like olives, so then make your bracha bori pri ha'etz on the apple. And why? Why is chaviv a criterion? Chaviv is a criterion, that which you like better, because you'll be saying the bracha with more gusto. You're saying it with more passion because I'm about to take a bite out of my beloved apple, right? Olives, but apples, right? So therefore the bracha will be a zestier bracha, right? So that's the machlokas. However, if the brachas are not equivalent, one is hadama and one is ha'etz, like let's go back to our celery and olive example, so then in that situation, everyone agrees. Since you're going to be making both brachas anyway, do whatever you want. Okay, that's you make a bracha on one, then you make a bracha on the other. So Meisvei, let's challenge that from the following brisa. If a person had in front of him a radish and an olive, now what's the radish? Adama. Olive is ha'etz. Mevarech al atznon upoter es hazayis. You first make a bracha on the radish, Bori Pri Ha'adama, and then you don't have to make a bracha of Bori Pri Ha'etz on the olive. So it sounds like that if you have a Ha'adama and Ha'etz, then you should just make the Ha'adama and then you exempt everything. And that's not what we just said. We just said you make Ha'adama on the Ha'adama and you make Ha'etz on the Ha'etz, or vice versa. But each one gets its own separate bracha, and we're not saying that over here. So what's going on? It sounds like over here, if you make ha'adama, it's a catch-all, even on those things that are bori pri ha'etz. So the Gemara says, no, don't make that mistake. Hacha b'may askinon kishahatznon ikar. What we're talking about over here is where the radish is your primary food, and the whole reason that you're eating the olive is as a supplement to your radish. Now, why would an olive be a supplement to a radish? Well, it could be you're eating radish salad, and the garnish in the radish salad is your olives. Rashi says that what the practice was back then is that radishes were extremely strong, right, and had a big zing to it, and so you would take a bite out of an olive, which had a much softer flavor to it, to take the bite out of the radish, and so if that's the whole reason you're eating it, then it's considered to be tafel. It's ancillary to the radish, and as a result, you don't make a bracha on it. But if the radish and the olive, if you're eating a radish olive salad instead of just a radish salad with olive garnish, so then you'd have to make two separate brachas, one on the radish and one on the olive. Ihachi, but the Gemara says, wait a minute, if that's the case, Ema Seifa, take a look at the next part. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Mevorach al Hazayis, Shehazayis Mimin Shiva. That Rabbi Yehuda disagrees, and he says you make a bracha on the olive, because the olive is the more important. And it seems like you exempt the radish by making a bracha on the olive. And even if that's not the case, but the Gemara says, V'chilesle l'Reb Yehuda hadidnan kol shu ikr v'imo tfela mevarach al ikr v'potros atfela. Doesn't Reb Yehuda hold of the principle that if you have a primary food and the secondary food, which is only there as a supplement to the primary food, that's called ikr and tafel, doesn't he hold that the ikr is the thing you make a bracha on and the tafel you don't make a bracha on? How could Reb Yehuda not hold of that? Everyone holds of that. Maybe you'll tell me that Reb Yehuda Taka does not hold of that halacha of ikr and tafel. V'hatanya Reb Yehuda Omer imachmas snon ba'azayis mevarach al snon u'poter es azayis. There's an explicit brisa that says explicitly that Reb Yehuda acknowledges that if the whole purpose of the olive is to take the bite out of the radish, is to take the sting out of the radish, then you only make a bracha on the radish, and you don't have to make a bracha at all on the olive. So clearly, our first brisa can't be addressing that case because Rabbi Yehuda seems to agree with it. And if so, then how can Rabbi Yehuda say in that first brisa that he holds that you have to make a bracha on the olive? So the Gemara answers, La'olam bitzanon ikar askina. The answer is, says the Gemara, no. That brisa is the first brisa that we quoted, is talking about where the primary food, the ikar, is the radish, and the olive is tafel to it. And unfortunately, you do get this answer from time to time. The Gemara says the brisa was taught with a section missing from it, which lends therefore to its misunderstanding. Really, the machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim is not in a case where the olive is ikar, the radish is ikar and the olive is tafel. Everyone agrees that you only make a bracha on the radish and you don't make a bracha on the olive. When do they argue? On a different case, which we're going to detail now because we have to insert certain words into the brisa. And it goes as follows. If you have in front of you a radish and an olive, you make a bracha on the radish and you exempt the olive. But that's only true when you're eating a radish salad with an olive garnish. But if the radish is not the main food, and olives and radishes are equal in your eyes, so divrei hakol mevarach al zeh v'chozeh mevarach al zeh. Then everyone agrees that you make a bracha separately on the radish and separately on the olive. You make a bari pri hadam on the radish and a bari pri eitz on the olive. And in line with our Mishnah, the Tanakama, which is the Chachamim, maintain that if you have two foods that have equivalent brachas, both are ha'etz or both are hadama, you can make the hadama or ha'etz on whichever one of the two you prefer, and that exempts the other food. And Rabbi Yehuda Omer mevarach al hazayish hazayis mimin shiva. And on that, Rabbi Yehuda disagrees, and he says, no, if you've got an olive and an apple in front of you, you got to make a bracha of bari pri ha'etz on the olive to exempt the apple, and not vice versa, because the olive is of the 7 species.
That's what we hold like that, right?
Well, it's not so clear. You have to go through Shulchan Aruch to see whether chaviv is adif or shivas haminim are adif. There's a lot of discussion on this very issue in Shulchan Aruch.
So what should we do?
So as a general rule, if you like everything exactly the same, you always make a bracha on the min shiva. But as far as whether chaviv is adif or the Gemara will tell us shortly how we paskin. but in general, you do give preferential treatment to the Shiva Saminim. Okay. So Pligi ba Rabbi Ami v'Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha. Now we have a machlokas between Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha. Chad Omer machlokas b'Berachos and Shabbos. So just to extend this discussion, we have a machlokas Amoraim. One Mando Amar says that the only time there's a machlokas between the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda is when the two foods in front of you have the same bracha. They're both ha'etz, so they're both ha'adama. The Rabbi Yehuda Savar min shiva adif, the Rabbanan Savri min chaviv adif. Rabbi Yehuda says that the min shiva, that which is the olive, because it's from the 7 species, is more important. And the Rabbanan hold that the chaviv is better, and therefore if you got one bracha to make it on whichever one you like better. Aval b'shein berachos and Shabbos divrei hakol mevarach al zeh v'chozer mevarach al zeh. But when the brachos are not equal, so one's ha'adam and one's ha'etz, there's no criterion, because you're going to be making a bracha on both. So just make a bracha on each one.
Does it matter which is first?
We'll see. We'll see in just a second. Yeah.
If you make Adama, does it include ha'etz already?
That's a very good question. Rashi's quick to point out that even though we learned before that if you erroneously make a bori pri ha'adama on something that's bori pri ha'etz, then b'di'evid you're yotzei. But if you know that you have a radish and an olive in front of you, you know that the olive is ha'etz, and you know that the radish is ha'adama, then making ha'adam and the radish does not exempt the olive. What do you mean? No.
Yeah, I mean, like as you're...
There's no lechatchila here. You know. Oh, yeah, I guess what you're saying is that you know before the fact that you know exactly what the score is. So if you know what the score is, then and the radish is adif, the radish is chaviv to you. It's more beloved to you. So there's the argument to be made that you could make the bracha first on the radish and then on the olive. Okay. So the Chad Omar. Af b'shein berachos and Shabbos, and by the way, the poskim also discuss the case, all right, in line with what Mr. Shiel was saying, is that what if you have two foods that you like equally, and one is ha'adam and one is ha'etz, it is preferable to make the ha'etz first, because they make the bracha of greater specificity before the bracha of less specificity. Okay, but in any event, let's go further. One Amora holds that you make a bracha if the brachas are equal. That's the only time that there's a machlokas. But if the brachas are different, everyone agrees there's no machlokas. But the Chad Omar af b'shem berachos and Shabbos no mi machlokas. But the other Amora holds that the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda disagree, even when you're dealing with ha'adama and ha'etz. Now, what that machlokas is, the Gemara is going to explain momentarily. So Bishlam Lamand Amar Bishabir Chosein Shabbos Machlokas Shapir. If you tell me that the machlokas is only when the brachas are equal, then clearly I understand what the machlokas is. You only got one bracha to make, and the question is which food do you make that bracha on? And that's machlokas, the Chacham and Rabbi Yehuda, like we just explained. Elo Lamand Amar Bishain Chosein Shabbos Pligi b'may Pligi. But if you're going to be making a bracha on each one, so then what's the machlokas? So Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah lahaktim. And that's, Alan, that answers your question. The answer is, which one do you make first? Which one gets higher priority as far as, now, you got two brachas to make. So which one should I say first? So Rabbi Yehuda says that you make a bracha on the one that's the Shiva Saminim. And the Chachamim say, no, whichever one you like better is what you should make the bracha on. The Amar of Yoseph, Yitema Rabbi Yitzchak, Kol HaMuktam B'Fosek Zeh, Muktam L'Bracha. And to illustrate this point further, we know that there's a precedent for this idea of priority, because in the Torah there are 7 fruits that are listed of Eretz Yisrael, and whichever one appears earlier in the pasuk takes priority over the one that comes later in it. So if I have, let's say, 2 fruits of Eretz Yisrael, I've got a grape and I've got a pomegranate. Since the grape appears earlier in the pasuk than the pomegranate, so Rav Yosef says that you should make your bori pri ha'etz on the grape because it's of a higher priority. And therefore the idea of priority, of which one is more important, of which one is before and which one is after, is an important issue. Shene'amar, eretz chita usara v'gefen useina v'rimon eretz eishemen u'devash. And that's why the Torah has to specify the various fruits of Eretz Yisrael. It specifies them to tell you which one comes before the other when I have a conflict of which one I should make a bracha on.
Is that the way that father or future father-in-law test the...
Yeah, they say that the way you test your future son-in-law is you put a plate of fruit in front of him and vegetables and see how he'll make the brachas to see... Yeah, so basically the point is over here is that if this is true, that there's a hierarchy even within the Shivas Aminim, then surely when you have one that's Shivas Aminim and one that's not from Shivas Aminim, then surely there's a hierarchy. And even therefore when you're going to be making a bracha on both, right, you should decide which one becomes before the other.
That's why it's the thing on the Shavuot, on the Rosh Hashanah night, you eat the apple before the Shivas Aminim.
Right. It's a very good point as we're coming up to Rosh Hashanah.
I just came to a shir and I was told that you eat the Shivas Aminim first.
Well, there's a good argument to make on that, unless you want to argue that the apple is chaviv because...
Some people don't bring out the Sheva Minim until after.
Some people don't bring out the Shivas Minim until afterwards. Yeah, okay, so if you want to avoid that whole issue, that's a good point. Very excellent point. Upliga de Rabbi Chanuk. And this idea that there's a hierarchy of prioritization based on the ordering of the fruits in the pasuk is in disagreement with Rabbi Chanan, who says that there's a different reason why the fruits are enumerated in the pasuk. The Amar Rabbi Chanan kol pasuk kulo l'shiur ne'emar. That the whole reason why these 7 fruits are enumerated is not to tell me a hierarchy, but rather is to tell me halachic measurements that I need to know for different halachos. Because each one of these fruits acts as a sort of a measuring stick for different halachic issues. So, for example, chita. Why does the Torah have to write wheat? It writes wheat because bread occupies a halachic gauge. And what's the example? Ditnan. Hanichnas lebeis hamenuga, that if a person enters into a leprous house, a house that has saras, so we know that the Torah says when you walk into such a house, you too become tameh, and everything that's in the house becomes tameh. So the kelev al kseifa v'sandala v'tabosav biyadav hu vehin tamei miyad. But if you're carrying garments, so then whatever you're carrying is like any other kli that you bring into the house, and you and the object that you're carrying becomes tamei right away. However, hayalavush kelev v'sandalav b'raglav v'tabosav v'etzvaosav hu tamei miyad vehin tahorin ad sheyisha b'chlei achilas pras. However, if you're wearing the clothing on your back does not become tamei right away. You become tamei right away, and the kalim, based upon the verbiage of the pasuk, the clothing that it says v'ha'ochel babayis, that only when you eat in the house do you have to purify your clothing, is what the Torah says. So from there we learn that you have to linger in the house for the amount of time that it takes to eat a meal. And what kind of meal are we talking about? The time that it takes to eat a half a loaf of bread. And what kind of bread are we talking about? So that's where the issue of chita takes a prominence. Pas chitin velo pas saorin. And the bread that we're talking about is wheat bread and not barley bread. Mesav, and you have to be eating it reclining, because when you eat something while reclining, you eat it more quickly, and wheat bread is consumed more quickly than barley bread. Ba'ochlan beliftan, and you eat it with dip, because that also helps you eat it more quickly because it goes down more smoothly. So the point is that wheat is used as a measuring stick for the halachic issue of how long you have to linger in a leprous house before your clothing becomes tamei. Now let's go on to the barley. Saora is that nan etzem kisaora mitame b'mago v'masa ve'eno mitame ba'ohel. That if there's a bone of a corpse the size of a barley kernel, so then if you touch it or you carry it, you become tamei with tumas meis. But if you're just in an enclosure with the bone the size of a barley, that does not make you tamei. You need a larger component of the body in order to impart tumah through tumas ohel. Okay, so there too you see now the barley is a criterion for a halachic measurement. Geffen, what about the grape or wine? So, kedei revius yain lenazir. How much must a Nazir consume in order to violate his Nazirism? The answer is he must consume a revius of wine or wine product. Okay, so that you see now the wine of, and by the way, Rashi points out a revius of liquid varies between whether it's based on its viscosity. So a revius of wine is different from a revius of water. And so as far as the surface tension and its volume, because of its thickness. So therefore, we're specifically talking about a revius of wine and not a revius of water. Now, te'ena, what about the fig? The fig also provides us with a halachic measurement, because there's a halach about Shabbos, kigro geres lahotzoah Shabbos. Because the Mishnah in Shabbos says, how much must a person carry outside in order to do the malacha of hotzoah on Shabbos? The answer is a food item the size of a grogeres, of a dried fig. Next, rimon. What is the pomegranate's halachic gauge? Kiditnan kol klei balei batim shiurin karimonim. That normally we say that once a kli is broken, it loses its status as a kli, and it loses its ability to obtain tumah, to become tameh. Now, what happens if the kli develops just a hole in it? So the question is, how large is the hole? So if it's a consumer's item, a household item that belongs to the consumer, then as long as the hole is up to the size of a pomegranate, then it's still considered to be a kli. Because the rationale is that you're not going to be so quick to throw away kalim with holes in them, because even though you can no longer use it, let's say, for liquid, you can still use it as a fruit basket or something else. But once it obtains a hole in it the size of a pomegranate, it's considered no longer usable, and therefore it's no longer a kli, and no longer is subject to tumah. Now, what about the next part of the pasuk? Eretz zei shemen, the land of olive oil. So what is olive oil? Right? What is the olive? How is that relevant for measurements, halachic measurements? Amar Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Chanina, Eretz shekol shiureha kazesim. This means that Eretz Yisrael is a land where all of the measurements for the Jewish people in halacha are the olive. The olive is the criterion for all halachic measurements. So the Gemara says, Kol shiureha sal kedaitich v'ha'i kahanach de'amran. How can you tell me it's the criterion for all halachic measurements if we've already enumerated several other fruits which provide other halachic measurements criteria? So the answer is Ella Eretz Shirov Shioreha Kazesim. But rather what it means is that for most halachas, except for the some that we've itemized above, for most halachas, what is considered to be eating and what is considered to be a proper shear for various halachas, the shear is most of the time a kazayas. So, for example, if you want to know how much chazer do I have to eat in order to be in violation of the Torah, the answer is a kazayas. If you want to know, right, and basically how much matzah do I have to eat the night of the Seder, I have to eat a kazayas. Right, so most halachas having to do with achila and having to do with many other issues are the shear of a kazayas. Devash, kikiko seves hagasa b'yom kippurim. And finally, the last fruit itemized in the pasuk, which is the date. How is that a halachic measurement? Because as far as being liable for kares and Yom Kippur, the Mishnah says you have to eat a piece of food that's the size of a thick or juicy date, and that's the criterion there. So you see from Rav Chanan that the reason why the Torah itemizes these fruits is not to present a hierarchy to you, but rather is to tell you about halachic measurements. So the Gemara says, no. V'ida chani shirin behedja miksivi, ella hilchasaninhu ukras machda ba'alma. So rather, the Gemara says that the other Manda Amar, who says that the itemized fruits in the pasuk present you with a halachic hierarchy, will tell you that I agree with Rav Chanan's principle that each fruit of Eretz Yisrael is there to teach about a different halachic measurement. But that's not what the HaKadosh Baruch Hu wrote the pasuk for, because all of the measurements are halacha l'Moshe Misina. And therefore, this pasuk is only used as an asmachta, is only something as a mnemonic reminder of what the halacha l'Moshe Misina is. Because these measurements were never itemized in the Torah. And therefore, the real purpose of the pasuk is to tell me how I prioritize brachas based upon which foods I have in front of me.
But Rabbi, even if it's all about measures, it doesn't matter. We still wrote about the measures in an order. It's like
It's like if somebody introduces people to a party, they say, here comes the prince, and then you say, here comes the queen. No, you talk about the queen and king first. So
you're suggesting it could be for both purposes.
Right.
Right.
But
So
even if it's not necessarily for that purpose, but the
order maybe.
there is an order no matter
order,
what, even if it's
the order would make a difference. Okay, I hear what you're saying, although I think that the premise that the Gemara was working under is that it was not necessary to write any of these fruits. And the reason why the Torah wrote these, itemized the fruits in the first place, because after all, a person could just go to Eretz Yisrael and find the fruits for himself. Why did the Torah have to itemize the fruits? One Mando Amr says it's because of priority, and the other Mando Amr to tell me how I prioritize my bracha, and the other Mando Amr says that it's to talk about halachic measurements. So it has to do with the extraneousness of the verbiage in the pasuk, not so much because you can kill two birds with one stone. But I hear your point is a well-taken point. Why can't you learn both from it? Apparently the Gemara was under the assumption that once I have one indication as to why the words were added in the pasuk, I can't necessarily derive anything else. So now the Gemara says, Rav Chisda v'Rav Hamnuna havo yasvi b'sudasa. These two sages were once sitting at a meal, Aisu l'kamayo t'mori v'rimone, and they brought out dates and pomegranates. Now, if you look at the ordering of the psukim, which is listed first, the pomegranate or the date? The pomegranate. Pomegranate is number 5 on the list. Date is number 7 on the list. So based upon their order, what the ha'et should have been made on which fruit? The pomegranate. So Shalkal Rav Hamnuna Brorach HaTamari Bereisha. Rav Hamnuna went ahead and he made the Bari Pri Ha'etz on the date. So Amar Le Rav Chisda Lo Shvir Le Mar Lahada Amar Rav Yoseph Itema Rav Yitzchak Kol HaMuktam B'Posuk Zeh Kodim L'Bracha. Don't you hold about the halacha that we just learned, that whichever one comes earlier in the pasuk is the one that gets the bracha, is the one that has the priority of the bracha. So why didn't you make a bracha on the pomegranate? Amar lei zeh sheni la'aretz v'zeh chamishi la'aretz. So he said to him, but the word aretz is written twice in the pasuk. The pasuk writes as follows: Eretz chita sa'ora gefenu seina v'rimon. It lists 5 fruits after the first eretz. And then it says Eretz ze shemen u'devash, the land of olive oil and honey, or olives and dates. So the way he said it is like this: you have Eretz number 1 and Eretz number 2, and really the Torah is presenting you with 2 lists. One list of 5 that comes after the first Eretz, and one list of 2 that comes after the second Eretz. Whichever fruit is closer or higher up on the list to Eretz is the one that takes priority. So pomegranates are number 5 on the list after Eretz number 1, but dates are number 2 on the list of fruits that comes after Eretz number 2. And therefore dates are higher on the list than pomegranates, and dates take priority. So he said, wow! Like his response was, Amar le man yoiv lo nagri de parzel of the nashmeina. He said, if only I had iron legs, that I could be indefatigable, or whatever indefatigable, or whatever the word is. If I could not be fatigued at all, then that would be great, because how do you pronounce the word? Indefatigable. I would then be able to run after you forever, to be able to learn as much Torah as possible, because this was such a chiddush for him. He was like blown away. He was blown away. Exactly. Okay.
When it says Dvash, does that always imply dates?
When the Torah says Dvash, unless it says specifically Dvash Devorim, that it implies dates, there may be exceptions, but I don't recall offhand. Itmar. So let's go on. Now we have of course, another very important halachic principle, which is when I'm eating a meal of bread and I've made hamotzi, what other foods fall under the hamotzi where I don't have to make a bracha on them anymore. The Rashi and Tosfos diverge greatly on this sugya, and Tosfos is more aliba de hilchasa, and so we're going to learn the sugya like Tosfos and not like Rashi. So if you note that I'm saying something that doesn't shtim with Rashi, you'll understand why. Now, heviu lifneim te'enim va'anovim, if they bring out for a person figs and grapes, b'soch hasun, in the midst of the meal, amar Rav Huna tu'unim bracha lifneim ve'inun tu'unim bracha la'achreim. So, Rav Huna says that these figs and grapes require a bracha, a pre-bracha. You have to make a bori pri ha'etz, but you do not have to make a bracha afterwards because you can fulfill your obligation of a post-bracha through the benching, through the Birkas Hamazon. So the principle is as follows. The principle is that the only foods that do not require a pre-bracha are those foods that are considered to be ancillary or supplementary to bread. Bread is the main staple, and other foods that you eat at the meal, such as meat and salad and vegetables and etc., those things are considered to be supplementary to the bread, and therefore you don't have to make a bracha. But if you have a food that is not normally eaten with bread, such as grapes, such as figs, so then you have to make a bracha on them, even if you're still in the midst of your meal. V'chein amar Rav Nachman tunim bracha lifnei v'tunim bracha lachreim. Rav Nachman concurs. However, Rav Sheshis disagrees, and he says amar tunim bracha bein lifnei bein lachreim. She'en lecha davar sheton bracha lefanav ve'ein ton bracha la'acharav ela pasa bo bekistin bilvad. Rav Sheshis holds that no, when you bring in a food that is not supplementary to the bread, you have to make a bori pri ha'etz before, and you have to make a post bracha. In this case, would be al haperos, because there's no such thing as a food which requires a pre bracha and does not require a post bracha, except for pas haba'a bekisnin, which is something that we need to develop an idea further. It's a certain kind of dough product which is mixed with other ingredients, and therefore Chazal says since you eat it in small measure, you only have to make a bori minei mezonos, and since it's eaten in such small measure, you don't even have to make a bracha achrona, or perhaps you only have to make a bori nefashos. That's an issue that's a little bit left vague by the Gemara, but it seems that what Rav Sheshis is suggesting is, and the main point that Rav Sheshis wants to make is, that for all other foods except for this nebulous pasaba b'kisnin, this dough product that is mixed with other items such as honey or nuts, you have to always make a pre-bracha and a post-bracha, even when they're eaten during the course of the meal. Upliga de Rabbi Chia. And this all disagrees with Rabbi Chia. The Amar Rabbi Chia, pas poteres kol minei ma'achal, v'yayin poter kol minei mashkim. Rabbi Chia says, you never have to make a bracha on any food if it's eaten in the course of the meal, because once you make hamotzi, that exempts all foods, and when you make a bracha on bori pri hagafen, on wine, that exempts all beverages. Now, we certainly paskin like the beverage issue. If a person having a glass of wine with his salad, and then they bring you out a glass of ginger ale afterwards, or a glass of water, once you've made the bori pri hagafen on the wine, you don't make any other brachas, you don't make a shahakol on your beverage. So that we certainly hold of. However, this issue of the bori hamotzi lechem min haaretz exempting all foods, that we don't paskin like. We paskin that the only things that hamotzi exempts are foods that are eaten with bread. But foods that are not normally eaten with bread, that are not part of your main entree, those require their own separate bracha, even when they're part of your overall meal.
And what about the after bracha?
And the after bracha we do not require, because like Tosfos says, Rav Sheshis is a das yachid, and Rav Huna and Rav Nachman are the majority opinion, and they say that you don't need a post bracha, that the benching will covers those other items. Amar Rav Papa therefore says, Hilchas advar haboin machmas asuda b'soch asuda ein tunim bracha l'lifneim v'lo lachareihem, v'shalom machmas asuda b'soch asuda tunim bracha l'lifneim v'ein tunim bracha lachareihem. So Rav Papa says, and this confirms what I just said, that any food that comes in the course of the meal, if it is considered to be part of your main entree that's eaten with bread, so then you do not have to make either a pre-bracha or a post-bracha. But if it's considered to be a food that is shalom machmas asud, it's not coming as a supplement to the main course, it's not an item that's eaten with bread, so then you make a pre-bracha, but you do not make a post-bracha that's covered in the benching. And la'achar hasuda, but if you have a food after the meal is already over, so then tunim bracha bein lifneim bein la'achareim. Then even though you haven't benched yet, you need to make a pre-bracha and a post-bracha. Tosfos says this is no longer the convention, because back in the times of the Gemara, they used to completely remove the entire tray, or the entire table that you were eating on, including the bread. And therefore, the meal was considered to be totally over, no longer any possibility of bread being part of the purview of this meal. And therefore, you have to make both a pre-bracha and a post-bracha, because the Birkas Hamazon can no longer cover that which is no longer associated with bread whatsoever. But nowadays, since we leave our bread on the table, and there's always the possibility of having more bread because of our eating, our social habits have changed, so therefore, you never have this halacha where you have to make a pre-bracha and a post-bracha. You only have the halacha where you have to make a pre-bracha on a dessert item that is not part of the entree. So, when they bring you out dessert, then if it's fruit, or if it's ice cream, or some other shahakol, you have to, according to halacha, according to Shulchan Aruch, and you guys learned now, you learned it in Daf Yomi, but of course we said don't paskin from Daf Yomi, but I'll tell you the psak. The psak is that you have to make a bracha on dessert items. Okay? Let no one tell you that you're exempt. We paskin, you have to make a bracha on dessert items. The only time you do not make a bracha on a dessert item is if it's what we call pasaba b'kisnin, is if it's this kind of mizoinus where there's a whole machlokes as to what pasaba b'kisnin really is. There are three different definitions in Shulchan Aruch, and as a result, one cannot definitively say that that particular mizoinus is what the Chazal referred to as pasaba b'kisnin. Maybe it's really pas. And as a result, the Mishnah Berurah says that a piece of cake or a cracker or whatever it is, since it's questionable whether it's pasaba b'kisnin or whether it's pas, the hamotzi that you made at the beginning of the meal exempts that mizoinus item. And therefore, any cake or pastry that you have at the end of the meal for dessert, even though it's true that it's not a supplement to your entree, does not get its own bracha.
Even a pie?
Even a pie, unless you argue that the filling of the pie would warrant its own bracha, which we're not going to get into just right now. Sha'alu ben Zoma. So they asked Ben Zoma the following question. And by the way, I would argue, just it's a good point, Mendel, but off the top of my head, and if I have to correct myself, I will, but in a situation like that, because you're eating the mouthful of pie together with the crust, and the crust could have a din of pas, so then I would argue that you wouldn't make a bracha, any bracha on the pie, even the filling. Shalu es ben Zoma, v'pnei ma omru davar ma'born machmas hasuda b'soch hasuda einem tu'unim bracha lo lifnei v'lo la'achareim. Why is this halacha true? That when you have foods that are coming as part of the entree, that you don't make a bracha either before or after? Amar lahem ho'olu pas potrasim. The answer is because the bread is the main staple, and everything else is considered to be supplementary to the bread. You want to argue that cultural mores have changed since then, and people stay away from bread? It's the thing that when the waiter brings you the bread now, you say, oh no, take it away, right? I don't want to be tempted by the bread, right? Nevertheless, the halacha has not changed. One could make a good argument that cultural mores have changed since then, and as a result, maybe the salad or whatever it is should not be considered to be supplementary to bread and should require its own bracha. But nevertheless, this halacha has not changed, and it's a much longer discussion. But in any event, well, if that's the case, why then, when I drink wine during the course of the meal, do I still have to make a borei priyagafen? Isn't wine also supplementary to my bread because I'm drinking it to let the food go down more easily? He answered, Shiny yayin de goreim bracha la'atzmo. Wine is different because literally it causes its own bracha. That Rashi explains that there are plenty of times when you make a bracha on wine, even when you don't need to drink, but you want to do some act of sanctification. So it has a certain chashivas. Tosfos has a slightly different way of understanding, which is that Chazal assigned wine a unique bracha above and beyond the borei priyahitz that you would normally think it gets. But the fact of the matter is that it's special. Wine occupies a special place in halacha, so therefore, even though all other foods that are considered to be supplementary to the bread do not require a bracha, wine, however, does. Have a wonderful day.